TWC's big component for this, but we are trying to find ways to help youth become independent, because that's our ultimate goal. We know that they've got a lot of challenges aging out of the foster care system, and we need to find a way to help them become independent enough that they can deal with all of the other things that they may need to deal with. And they can't do that if they're constantly having to deal with the homelessness, unemployment, all those different problems that are things that we can reach into. And that from there, hopefully they can find ways with those resources to solve some of the more complex problems that maybe TWC isn't prepared to support them in or to help them in, but that we can give them the groundwork and the foundation that they can build on. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the history. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to very briefly discuss the workforce solutions component and the foster care priority, the transition centers and the advocates who are paid for by TWC through the TANF grants. And then I'm going to just talk about a few of the ongoing and new initiatives that we have that are going to be coming out soon, or that are already in place, but that are available right now. We're going to talk very briefly about an exciting new initiative that the Texas legislature directed us to start, and that it will be coming out later this summer with regard to driver's education. We're very excited about that. That'll also be run through the Strategic Workforce Initiatives Department. And then I'm going to just touch very briefly on some of the new initiatives coming through vocational rehabilitation. Vocational rehabilitation has established a liaison for foster care issues. So there is now a focus on that, and they are developing some new projects there. But we're going to just talk very briefly about the pre-ETS program and how that can be applied to youth right now. So TWC has been supporting youth in foster care through our transition center process, and through our transition centers and through the priority of service. Since about 2004, there was a federal grant that came down that was the initial impetus for this. They developed the first transition centers around that time, and also that was about when TWC issued the, it was WD 3104, I believe it's changed now, but emphasizing that they're a priority population, and 2011 is when we began to independently run the transition center program. So instead of it being us sort of helping a federal agency do it, we were funding the grants ourselves through the TANF money, and we were operating, or not operating, but we were the direct responsible agency for the TANF grants for that. That was also, 2011 is also when we established the formal foster care priority. So that is the one that says basically that after veterans, youth in foster care are the highest priority population at any workforce center in the state. So any youth in foster care that identifies themselves and is up to age before their 23rd birthday is the highest priority to receive any services that are available to them. Childcare, as always, is a little bit different, but it's basically the same thing. And then we have continued to develop the transition centers. In 2016, we formally established an advocate position. So there's now a dedicated staff member at every transition center that is focused on providing workforce guidance and support and being the warm handoff connection between the transition center and the Workforce Solutions Office. And then we, in 2021, the 87th regular session, we were directed to establish the Youth Driver Education Funding Program, which I'll talk about it a little bit later in this, but that's going to be a new initiative coming out this summer to pay for driver's education for youth in foster care and a number of other groups. So there are Workforce Solutions, 28 boards, lots of different offices. Again, there's funded by a variety of funds, but the services here, job placement, training services, career exploration, resume writing, interview skills, etc. These are all the skills that we're looking at and that we know that these youth in foster care need. And one of the reasons that we do want to get youth in foster care into the Workforce Solutions offices as much as possible is that we know that they're not aging out of the agency with the same resources that other 18-year-olds have. They are unlikely to have, or not unlikely, they are less likely to have completed high school. They're less likely to have had a job in high school. They're less likely to be pursuing further education beyond high school. They have often not received even some of the supports that the high schools offer. Even if they did graduate, they often have not spent time working with career counselors at the school. We know that at 18, when most youth age out of the foster care program, about 20% will be homeless in the first 4 quarters. And about, about 58% will have been homeless at least once before they're 24. 58% will have had a child by the time they're 24. And about 55% will have been convicted of a crime by the time they're 24. So there's a lot of challenges to employment and a lot of challenges to stability in all of these youth, or not all of these youth lives, but the majority of these youth lives. By age 26, only between 3 and 5% will have some kind of post-secondary credential or attainment. So again, they're not eligible for a lot of the higher paying jobs that would really raise them out of poverty. Most of them are making below the poverty guidelines, and those are the federal 1997 poverty guidelines. So we're looking at very, very low wage, and even if they are fully employed, they're not progressing the way other 18-year-olds do. So they're not moving up in the career. They're not seeing progress in raising their wages. We estimate, and there's a lot of estimates on this, so I'm going to claim that this is the only possible answer, but we're estimating that it's about $300,000 to the state for every child that ages out of the foster care system. I know over 1,000 age out of the foster care system every year in Texas. So we're looking at potentially $300 million or more in services that are being needed by these youth to try and help them get stabilized and to get organized, because they're not able to find a job, because they're not able to be independent. So the transition centers were the TWC's approach to this. We know that a lot of these youth have a significant distrust of authority, of institutions. They've been their whole life being told what to do, controlled by bureaucrats, basically. And so we understand that they may not instinctively want to go to a workforce solutions office. And so the transition centers are designed to be a physical location that is welcoming, that is aimed specifically at these youth, and that has a place where there's not just these workforce services, but it's a place where lots of other services can be co-located. Some of our transition centers offer, mental health services. Some of them offer laundry, showers. They offer food bank. They offer clothing bank. They offer just a place to get on the internet, things like that. These are all different opportunities that these transition centers offer. And we offer all that and we support all of that because we know that brings youth in, and we've seen that brings youth in. And that's why we also want to have the workforce advocate there. And the workforce advocate is employed by the transition center, but is trained on a lot of the same stuff that our workforce solutions counselors are trained on. They're ready to help guide youth through the process. They understand what they're eligible for, what they're not eligible for, and they have a working continuous relationship with the local workforce solutions office, whatever the closest one is. And so they are able to get the youth interested and started and excited about the process, and then oftentimes physically drive them from the transition center to the workforce solutions office and do an introduction to try and build that trust. We know that the key thing that we as an agency and we as any entity serving youth in foster care have to do is establish trust between ourselves and the youth. And when we can do that, the youth is willing to come back, is willing to listen, is willing to believe that we can help them in a way that is productive. So our transition centers serve youth up to age 26. And so it's a little bit wider than the priority of service, but we know that again, as I was saying, up through age 24, we've got all these statistics and challenges. And we know that those numbers may be a little bit better when you go all the way to 26, but they're not significantly better. So we're seeing a lot of youth that come in at age 25, and we can provide support to them. So the key thing, as I mentioned, is that sort of continuous communication. It's the same workforce advocate every day in the office, and these youth can develop a relationship with them. Whenever we talk with our workforce advocates, we know, and what we hear from them is that they develop these relationships with the youth, these one-on-one relationships. They can help not just with workforce related materials, but the youth will come with a problem about legal issues they're having, will come with a problem about housing, will come with all sorts of different challenges that they're facing, because they know this is a place where they can be listened to. And it's a place that probably knows a lot of the agencies around town that can help them. We also have funds to support mobility related to working with the transition center or working with their initial job. And then we also, again, we constantly are pushing transition centers to connect with local agencies, local entities that can support youth in foster care deal with the barriers that they're facing. So I just want to, I guess, so we have 18 transition centers all across Texas. We don't yet have one in every board region, but we do have a lot of different board regions. The boards, the Department of Family and Protective Services, and the transition centers have a three-way memorandum of understanding for every transition center and every board that connects them, so that every board can reach out to a transition center, even if it isn't located in their area, so that they can get the kind of guidance and the foster care know-how that these transition centers have for all the boards in Texas, not just the ones that have a transition center in them. They also work very closely with the DFPS PALS program, Preparation for Adult Living Services. They are a group that is charged with, from age 14 to 18, preparing youth that are in foster care and are likely to age out for living independently. So there's an entire program that DFPS runs that handles that, and our transition centers work closely with PALS so that there can be something of a handoff. And indeed, some of the transition centers are also the local PALS provider. And so in some cases, they're literally in the same building with the PALS program. So we are constantly trying to find ways to make things easier for youth that are facing barriers to come to one place and resolve it, to get that sort of a one-door philosophy brought to this. Because again, we know that if we tell them, oh, well, go here and they can help you, we're going to lose half of them just in that one transition. So again, we're constantly trying to find ways to minimize that and to bring more services in. A lot of our transition centers have other agencies come to the center on a certain day of the week or a certain day of the month to present about housing, about transportation, about workforce solutions options. I know that at least one workforce solutions office actually brings a computer and sets up a fully functional workforce solutions station in the transition center one day. I think it's every 2 weeks. And so you don't even have to go to the workforce solutions office. You can go there and they can do all the paperwork and the scanner and everything through the system. So there's a lot of opportunities, and we're very pleased with that. And we're very pleased with the networking that we're seeing. The workforce advocates can become the center of a local network. Particularly, I know that the Pride Center in El Paso has done a fantastic job of just connecting all of these different resources together to not just be a transition center, but to be a sort of a network of services that even if the youth isn't coming to the transition center itself, that this network is there for them. And so maybe agencies that I haven't mentioned here, maybe the local housing agency, maybe something like that, is now being informed and empowered to provide youth empowering guidance to these youth when they come into the housing center. And maybe they'll say, are you also looking for support with employment? Are you looking for, this, that, and the other thing? Excuse me. So we're really looking to provide communication between agencies. One of the challenges that we find, and one of the challenges we hear every time, I'm just going to jump ahead to the conference, TWC Foster Care Conference. Yes, our conference. So we host a conference every year, and we bring together the transition center workforce advocates and other transition center staff, board staff and solutions. We bring together foster care liaisons from higher education and from the school districts. And we try and bring together representatives from local communities, industry, and so on. The goal of the conference is really not for TWC to set itself up as an agency that can tell you how to solve the challenges that foster youth are facing, but to say we need to be at the table. We need to be helping bring this network together. We can't do it alone. We don't have the resources to do a lot of these things that, we're not a housing agency. We're not, there's other agencies for that, but we can be the agency that says, let's all come together and let's talk about how can we work together to do this. We're really focused on evidence-based tools and how can we make real change. There's a lot of need for different services, and we are always trying to figure out how can we find something that really makes a difference. I mean, everybody wants that magic bullet, and we're never going to find the one. But as we look at different practices, with the advantage of 18 transition centers across the state, we can see 18 different approaches. And sometimes one agency has, or one transition center has something that's really working, and that's what we can bring the conference together and say, look at this great thing that they're doing. We're also pushing them to develop strategic plans regionally. So it's not just the transition center deciding what it's going to do, but for the transition center to convene its stakeholders together to say, what can we as the El Paso region or as the Lubbock region do over the next 18 to 24 months to figure out one piece of this puzzle and bring us all a little bit closer together. And that's always our push. Integrated services, I've talked about that plenty. We're also really interested in the employers side of it. There's employers throughout Texas that are really committed to hiring youth in foster care, that have programs that are designed to provide the trauma-informed practice, to educate managers. One of the things that we're really pushing in this most recent conference, and probably in the future conferences, is these youth are a fantastic resource. They've had a lot of experience. They're often able to be more independent than other youth at the same age, but they will also probably have some skill deficiencies that you might not expect when, again, if you're used to working with a specific group of an age range. So thinking about how can we train managers to support youth that may have a different deficiency of skills than the standard youth that comes in, but also to take advantage of their strengths and independence where appropriate. So thinking about how can we support employers in training their managers and training the frontline staff that are working with this youth, because again, we know that a lot of these youth haven't been trained in conflict management and haven't been trained in how to deal constructively with authority figures who are giving them criticism. And everybody who's worked a job is going to get criticism at some point. That's just the joy of employment. And we do see that youth, we can get them into a job, and then 3 weeks later, they're out of the job again. And that's a challenge that we're constantly trying to figure out, is how can we prepare them to deal with that feedback, to deal with that criticism, particularly when they've spent much of their life listening to people tell them what to do, who, again, they've been very frustrated, most of them, with the caseworker that they've had to work with. Many of them have had challenges with their foster parents. These are all authority figures that they've had challenges with, and that they really haven't ever had any way of responding to. And now they have a choice, which is to quit. And we want to help guide them that there's other choices that they can make, because this is an important part of being able to sustain a job, is to not quit the first time you have a fight with your boss. And so we're looking at ways that we can provide that kind of support. But also, and again, this is the other side of that, is we want to help train managers to be thoughtful about how they're presenting themselves. It can be easy to come across as very authoritarian in a workplace environment, and with just a little bit of extra work. And I think this is something that we've been really kind of emphasizing. This is probably a good skill for any manager to know. How can they come across in a less authoritarian, a less, aggressive way when it's appropriate? Because most people don't like just being barked at and told what to do. So we're looking at how can we help managers be a more responsive and a more trauma-informed practice in their workplace. So the most recent conference, we had over 200 attendees. It was 100% digital this year. And we talked about trauma-informed care, housing solutions, dual status youth, so youth that are both formally in foster care and are also involved with the justice system. We talked about the community colleges, which is another key group that we're really trying to latch onto. Again, as I said, we're looking at 3 to 5% of youth who age out of foster care have a post-secondary certification or degree by age 24 or 26, I'm sorry. And we know that community colleges are a big piece of that to try and get them something, because even maybe the 4-year degree isn't what they're looking for, but there's a lot of certifications. There's a lot of, 1 semester, 1 year, 2-year courses that can get you access to some of those better jobs. Strategic planning. Oh yes, and then consistency and reliability and follow-up. And that's the other big thing that we're always talking about. Is it's very hard. We have one workforce advocate, and depending on the place, they may have 100 youth that come in, not every day, but over the course of a month. And it's hard to remember everybody. It's hard to give that relationship with everybody. But we really want to push with anybody that's working with youth in foster care that we're trying to find a way to make them feel like they are seen as a person and not as a case file. And that is what most of them, when we had our youth panel 2 years ago at the conference, we had a group of 5 youth come in to talk about their experience in foster care and post foster care. And they talked about how oftentimes they walk into an authority figure's office and they just feel like, oh God, I've got to get out that thick binder file. And I've got to flip through it and try and understand, 30 pages of history or 50 pages of history or several hundred pages of history for this youth. And that is being projected by this person that they're walking into the room with. And so thinking about how can we connect with them as a person? How can we, take a moment to just talk about something fun, about a shared interest, about something that they want to talk about what's going on in their life. That's both important for establishing that, but it's also good to just, again, practice in talking with adults about, what's appropriate to talk about in a work environment, what isn't. That's, again, all these life skills that youth often have if they've grown up in a stable home environment. But if they've grown up in a constantly changing foster care environment, they often don't necessarily have a great set of skills in terms of what is work appropriate, what is privacy appropriate, and so on. So we really want to focus on that. And then in listening to youth, every conference, we have at least one panel with the youth in foster care. We're trying to get more speakers to present on topics. One of the things we're seeing more of is that there are youth who are or adults who are identifying as formerly youth in foster care, who are now taking on roles within the FPS, within TWC, within other agencies, and can really be a guidance and say, I know foster care from the inside, but I also know TWC, I also know DFPS, I also know those rules, and I can kind of try and help us find that common ground. Because one thing that the youth often don't understand is that there are enormous amounts of rules that cover everything, and that we can't just do what they think is in their best interests at any given moment. We necessarily have to follow all those rules, and trying to explain that in a way that doesn't close the door on further conversation is very challenging. So that's a definite topic we want to. So the TWC, as part of this, we've established a website. It's part of the TWC one. It's foster care programs. I will say that if you just Google Texas Workforce Commission foster care, this is the page that you get. There's not a lot of competition in that Google search. You can definitely write it down, but you can also Google it pretty easily. But we are focused there on providing resources for the youth, resources for workforce solutions boards, and also just as much as we can of our conference panels, our presentations, we're trying to put that online. So we've got several different panels and presentations that are available there. We haven't yet put up this year's conference panels, but we will be putting up the slideshows and presentations that we recorded from this most recent conference pretty soon. We also try and put any kind of other resources from other agencies that we have. So we have links from that page, you can get to DFPS, you can get to a number of nonprofits in the state, you can get to the transition centers, the boards, all those different organizations. So it's a good one-stop for, primarily it is aimed for people who are supporting youth in foster care, not the youth themselves, but obviously there are some resources that are applicable to both groups. I also want to just mention Jobs Y'all. How many people have heard of Jobs Y'all? I'm just curious. How many of those people, if you don't work for TWC and you've heard of Jobs Y'all? All right, couple of you. Jobs Y'all is an initiative. It is a youth-focused career exploration tool. It's really designed to be peer-to-peer structured. So it's about real youth talking about their real life experience with employment. It is not just for youth in foster care, obviously, but it is targeting that same transition age demographic. And I think of transition age as sort of that 18 to 26 range. We're trying to help people get into that first job. We know that youth that age out of foster care, if they get that first job in the year and they can hold on to that first job for a while, they're much more likely to be employed at 24. They're much more likely to be seeing career advancement. That first job is really key, getting in there, getting stabilized. And again, when we see, even if they don't necessarily get it in that first year, if at 22, if at 23, they can land a job and that job clicks with them and they hold it, once they're in a job, they tend to be able to sustain it and move forward from there. So it's really that first job that really works for them that we're constantly struggling to figure out how to connect them to. So Jobs Y'all is a great tool for that. So we always recommend, if you're working with youth in foster care, to connect them with Jobs Y'all. Youth Drivers Education Funding Program. This is what I spent a lot of my time thinking about right now. In last legislative session, it was decided that to expand, let me go back a step. The previous legislative session, the 86th legislative session, they established the driver's license fee waiver, which means that youth in foster care, victims of domestic violence, and youth that are homeless can have all of the fees associated with receiving a driver's license or Texas state ID waived for them. And they set up a donation program to pay for that program, so it's all being paid for by donations from Texans. Well, they come around to the 87th, and the community was saying that that's great that they don't have to pay for the driver's license, but if they can't get the driver's license education, which can cost $100 or $400 if you need behind the wheel or whatever, it doesn't really help them if they can get the driver's license, but not the actual thing to pass the test. And so the legislature passed a bill that would direct TWC to receive some of those funds that are being collected by DPS and to pay for driver's education for youth in foster care, again, homeless youth, victims of domestic violence, and so on. This program is in the final rule stage right now. We will be rolling it out later this summer, but it is going to pay for online education, behind the wheel education, the driver's exam, all the things that you need to do in order to be able to be successful and get to the point where you can get that driver's license. We know that both having a vehicle and being able to drive gives you that independence, and it makes it easier to hold down a job if you have control of your transportation. Again, one of the things we hear about is that I can get a job, but I'm living in this apartment here. My job is 90 minutes and 3 bus changes over here. If something goes wrong, I'm going to be late to work, and that can really, some jobs have very strong rules about attendance and so on that can really make that much, much harder. Again, from that foster care page I mentioned earlier, that will be where we'll make the application process. It'll all be through that webpage, but we'll also be doing a big announcement either later this fall or later this summer or very, very early fall, depending on exactly when we can get the presentation set up. All right. We're now going to transition from foster care, which I know very well, to vocational rehabilitation, which I was trained on. So I apologize if this is a little bit less detailed, but the purpose of VR is to support individuals with disabilities so they can maintain employment with the necessary supports to have a productive and meaningful vocational experience. And these services can consist of job placement, coaching, job readiness, short-term therapy to address their disability, transportation, and almost anything that is going to empower the individual to be a member of the workforce. The pre-employment transition services, or PREETs, are a group of services that a student with a disability can receive through an abbreviated application process that requires proof that the youth or the student has a disability, along with a parental consent if the student is younger than 18 or has a guardian. And this gives them access to instruction on self-advocacy, counseling on post-secondary opportunities, work-based learning, and job exploration counseling and workplace readiness training. The benefit is that this can be done through an abbreviated application process. You don't have to go through the entire VR application process. You can just get into pre-ETS with an abbreviated application process. And then if those 5 services that I just mentioned aren't sufficient to make them ready for the workforce, they can then from there apply for the full VR services. So youth can be prepared to have a conversation with the VR counselor. And one of the key things, and again, this is one of those organizations that we didn't discover VR, they've always been there. We went out and we really pushed connecting with the VR counselors to all of our transition centers. And so one of the things that we've really seen bear fruit in the last 2 years is that there's now much closer relationships between the school VR counselors and the transition centers where there's a transition center. And so we're starting to see more ability to connect and to refer from the transition center to the VR counselor. A lot of the youth, there is a VR counselor for every school. And so any youth that's in school has a VR counselor that they can be referred to directly through that school. You can also go to the TWC webpage and go to the directory of general rehabilitation offices. And that will provide you with a link to all of the VR offices. And that will, and from there you can start your VR application to either the full service or to pre-ETS. So those are definitely available to everyone, not just for youth in foster care, but they're a service that we're really pushing because again, we know that youth that are aging out of foster care are more likely than other youth of the same age to have a disability that presents a barrier to employment. And so we're constantly trying to figure out how can we help those, and this VR has been a huge help to us in trying to figure out that piece of the puzzle, both with the services that they offer, but just the knowledge that they bring to the table in any of the, again, these networks that we're talking about. How can other agencies be more disability friendly? How can we be more accessible? That's an ongoing issue that we face. Oftentimes these small nonprofits are not necessarily able to pick the perfect accessible building that they really would like to. They have to kind of work within a budget. And so again, how can we find ways to work around some of the physical plant that we're stuck with to work with everyone. So VR has been tremendously helpful and we're looking forward to continuing to partner with them. With that, I know we have some time left, but I don't actually know how much time. A little bit of time left, I guess. About half an hour. But yeah, so I have plenty of time for any questions. Have there been any questions online?
Not yet.
All right. Are there any questions from the audience?
Question, I'll bring you one. Can you share maybe one of the most successful stories with foster care and the services that, or any of the success stories of the actual?
So I think one of my favorite stories is I joined TWC in 2018, and about the first foster care conference I was part of was the fall of 2018, so about 5 months later. And we had to scramble to find all the people for that conference. And we found a youth that was willing to speak on our panel and talk about it. And so they came to the panel, they did a wonderful job speaking. We went on. And then this past conference, I was looking for speakers and I reached out to a nonprofit agency called Texas Network of Youth Services that we've worked with a lot. And one of their staff members was that same youth that had presented at my conference 4 years ago, and that was now going to be presenting at the conference on some of the services that Tenoids has offers and some of the stuff about trauma-informed care. So that was a really exciting moment for me to see that youth kind of connect all the way across there. That wasn't really a transition center story. We weren't directly involved in that one, but I also know that I think I mentioned the El Paso Transition Center, the Pride Center, a little bit. from the state office, I don't really work with the youth very often, or the foster care liaison, again, doesn't work with the youth very often from TWC, but just working with the Pride Center and seeing the wonderful, relentless in the most good sense of that word way that agency has brought in more and more and more partners to their network in that area has been really inspiring. Just to see how they've connected so closely with the workforce board, how they've connected with the city government, how they've connected with how the local housing authority, all these different agencies that are there have been able to be brought together. And it was one of those situations where we did a strategic planning session where we facilitated a strategic planning session for each region. And by the time they showed up to the first session, they'd already been meeting as a group pretty consistently. So they already had a strategic plan, and really we were just there to be like, yes, you have a strategic plan, congratulations. It's wonderful to see that when that network, we talk about it all the time, but it is hard. I mean, we're all very busy. All these agencies are very busy. No agency that supports youth in foster care is overstaffed. So, we're constantly trying to find time to get these networks and find the level of commitment that works and that produces that relationship. And I think, again, the Pride Center is one. The Hayes Center in Houston has also done a fantastic job there. Many of the other ones have, and I just haven't talked to them in a while. So I'm sure there's plenty of other ones, but.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. You mentioned the transition centers inviting the workforce centers to come and present to the youth. Am I right? Did I hear that right?
Yes.
So are all of the services that are at the workforce centers, and you mentioned VR, even at the state office level, working with them at the local level, are all those services being presented at the centers, or are they trying to get them presented?
I believe that they are in most cases. Certainly, I don't know the content of every presentation, but we do know that the local workforce office has a dedicated staff member that comes over and works with the workforce advocate, either doing these presentations or just as an information resource for the workforce advocate. And I believe that, yes, they're addressing all of the different services that are available. So you should, through the transition center, you should be able to access and have explained to you all of the different services. The advocates often aren't able to get into the hyper nitty-gritty eligibility rules and so on. But again, they should be available.
Planting the seeds for those types of programs.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thank you.
And as I think I mentioned, that they are also some places where you actually can do the services. You can have your appointment with a workforce staff member, workforce counselor at the transition center instead of at the workforce solutions office. So there's a lot of different options out there. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. Our email is twc.texas.gov. That email is for several of us. So if you send an email there, we will get back to you and can answer any questions, or if you've got further networking or anything you'd like to talk about, we're happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.